My name is Angie, and this is a story I wasn't supposed to find.
And I'm her sister, Cindy. We grew up hearing almost nothing about our great-grandmother. Just a name, Stella Smith. No photos, no grave, just a blank space in the family story.
We knew a little about her, like she was married in Springfield, Illinois in 1925. She had 2 daughters that she gave up for adoption through the Illinois Home and Aid Society, and then absolutely nothing. Nothing before 1925 and nothing after giving up her children in 1930.
We had no idea what happened to her, where she went, or even if she was alive for long after that. She was just missing, and she stayed missing for over 90 years until a DNA test cracked the case wide open.
This is Buried Threads, a podcast about family secrets, silence, reinvention, and what happens when lost stories begin to resurface.
If you've been following our journey to discover more about our great-grandmother Stella Smith, you know a DNA search set us on the road to finding out her real name and a whole other family searching for her. Paul, a close DNA match, helped us to realize her real name, or her first name, was Estrella Suarez, who came to the U.S. as a child from Spain. She lived with a family, Manuel, Rosa, and their children. And then Estrella married Emilio Valdez, had a child of her own named Mary Rose, and also experienced the loss of a stillborn baby boy. And then she disappeared in the middle of the night.
She reappeared in a town not far away as Stella Smith and married a man named Christopher Columbus de Board. They had 2 children, whom were eventually given up, Florence to foster care and Marie Christine to adoption. And Estrella disappeared again. Our grandmother, Marie Christine, was never able to connect with her birth family, and that is why we began this journey on her behalf to learn what she never knew.
Today, we turn our focus to Christopher Columbus de Board, Estrella's second husband and the man who never stopped watching from the sidelines.
Christopher's story began in the Ozarks, kind of where you live, Cindy.
Exactly.
In southwest Missouri. He was born in 1898, and he was the second child of Samuel and Martha de Board. Christopher had an older brother named John and 2 younger sisters, Sarah and Mary Ellen. There was a third sister who died as an infant. When Christopher was a young child, both of his parents died just a short time apart, probably from an epidemic or flu. There's not really anything listed on their death certificate, but he was 6 years old. His parents both died within six to 8 months of each other.
We have a picture of Martha and the 4 children, which we believe was taken after Samuel's death, and we will post this. But after the death of both of their parents, the children were sent in different directions. Well, let me say, it's pretty common for family members to take in orphan children, and that's what happened. The 4 children went to live with their grandparents for a time, and then eventually the 2 younger girls were taken in by the Wright family. That's W-R-I-G-H-T. We don't know if there was a legal adoption or not, but they did take the Wright name, so we assume that there was. It's possible. It appears, though, that the boys, after being with their grandparents, were sent to work as farm hands, bouncing from farm to farm across Missouri and Arkansas. It would have been a hard life with little stability and little nurturing for young boys.
It isn't hard to imagine that Christopher, as an adult, had a hard time staying put, as Estrella had put it. We found a newspaper article from Galena, Missouri, showing Christopher found himself in some legal trouble, minor, as a teen. The charges were ultimately dismissed, and a few months later, he enlisted in the military in St. Louis at the Jefferson Barracks.
And you said those things were connected, or you believe they're connected?
I suspect they were connected.
Like enlisting was a way to straighten him up, basically?
Yes, that happened a lot. He listed his siblings as his closest kin, and so it's likely he kept in touch to some degree.
We know from his military record that Christopher served in World War I. He went to France, and he re-enlisted in the Army in 1921. We'll talk more about this later. But in short, by 1924, he was out of the military and in the area of Springfield, Illinois.
That could be another interesting factor in Christopher's life that speaks to who he was as an adult. He bounced around after being orphaned as a child, got into some trouble, went to the military, fought in the war, re-enlisted for a time, and then found himself a relatively young man on his own again, but never really establishing adult rhythms and routines.
Yeah.
How did war impact this young man with a troubled past? There were veteran services available. Would Christopher access them?
We do seem to know more about that now, though we can't know exactly how it impacted Christopher. It does appear that he didn't live a stable life after being discharged from the Army, so it is possible his childhood experiences, the trauma of war, maybe both impacted his ability to remain in one place and to provide for his family, at least from Estrella's perspective.
The next time that Christopher surfaced officially, he was marrying Stella Smith, Estrella, in 1925 in Springfield. Of course,
Springfield, Illinois.
Excuse me, yes, Illinois. Of course, we know the story from there. He had 2 daughters, Florence and Marie Christine, by October of 1928, Christopher and Estrella were no longer together. He at least had some contact with Florence, though it was more than likely sporadic. She was placed in foster care with the Redburn family and seems to have remained in their care throughout her childhood years. She was named as the foster daughter of Mrs. Della Redburn in an engagement announcement when she was 17.
Now, Christopher and Stella's younger daughter, Marie Christine, was ultimately adopted by the Hickman family. Our family's story was that each parent took a child when they split up, and that Estrella eventually gave Marie Christine up for adoption. We know now that narrative isn't very likely. Florence had a foster family, but also seemed to keep in touch with Christopher over time. But it doesn't seem the same as we know it's the same isn't true for Marie Christine. You found that legal notice in the Daily Illinois State Register, which is a Springfield newspaper, that had a notice directed to Christopher saying that Marie Christine was going to be declared independent, and that his legal custody was going to be removed, and that then she would be put up for adoption. The article said that Christopher had 20 days to appear to contest the legal process, and that was posted in March of 1932. But we assume that Marie Christine had been with her family as a foster child, and then they went through the process of adopting her. Clearly, Christopher was not in the picture, and it appears he didn't have any contact, which would be the reason for the legal posting in the newspaper as an attempt to inform him of his loss of guardianship.
Christopher's little family may have seemed like a fresh start for his life, but it didn't last long. The marriage unraveled. He couldn't hold a job. He drifted. The girls were split up, living separate lives. Stella disappeared, and Christopher went quiet.
Yeah, we found records showing that he showed up at the Danville Veterans Home maybe a couple times. He was known to disappear, according to his family, right? He was known to disappear disappear and then show up sick or needing some type of help or something like that. One family member said he was seen by family back in Missouri, and he didn't have a coat, and he was sick. So apparently he needed that, and I think the family helped provide that for him. That stuck out to them.
Florence seems to be the only person he was truly tethered to, despite his instability. She listed him as her father in her wedding announcement, not the one when she was 16 that we talked about before, but the actual one when she was in her 20s and she got married. And at that time, she stated that he was living in Peoria, which did match up with some other known information that we have. He listed Florence as his next of kin when he attempted to register for the World War II draft. And so it's clear that he cared. He just didn't maybe know how to be stable, or maybe he never had the tools to be.
Right. He also maybe had some kind of affiliation with a CCC camp in Southern Illinois. That's a Civil Conservation Corps camp. It was a work relief program during the Great Depression, which gave labor jobs to young men, which would make sense for somebody who would have been younger, maybe not having stable work.
He listed that on his draft card as his employer.
At the time. So
then Christopher filed for divorce in 1944, more than a decade after Estrella left, citing abandonment as the cause. He stated he had no idea where she was other than her last address, and the court was never able to contact her. The divorce was final in May of 1944, more than 14 years after the two had parted ways.
That is a long time. Well, we discussed in our last episode that it is possible that filing for divorce was related to Florence's pending marriage. We know there was an announcement when she was 17 years old, or 16 years old, not the marriage that it didn't ever actually take place, but the timing of those two things. We aren't sure, but we think they might be related. Very early in the search for our great-grandmother, you connected Christopher DeBoard's family. You connected them to us well before the DNA test. What did they know about Christopher?
Yeah, so luckily his name is unique enough that it wasn't hard to find him. And really, his life was fairly well documented up until he went into the military. So again, finding his information with his family and siblings, all that was very not hard at all. They just didn't know anything about where he was either. And so we were able to connect with them. I actually connected with a couple different people, but one of them was a gentleman who was working on a complete deboard line, like just broadly for all deboards kind of in the U.S., which is a huge number. And so he had built this massive database, and so he was able to help me connect and figure out where Christopher fit in, and then point me in the direction of other family members to contact. And when I reached out to them, again, he was known to them. They also wanted to know where he was. They also didn't know where he had been
He was
buried.
on their family trees and in their lines, but
they just didn't. He was just an enigma because he moved around and they didn't know where he was.
Yeah.
They characterized him as a wanderer, so no surprise. When I reached out to them 20 years ago now, which is hard to believe, it's been that much time, but one of the cousins went to the nursing home to talk to the last living elder who might have remembered him, and she did.
That's amazing. So documentation and research can get you so far, but nothing is like talking to someone who has firsthand memories. So what did she have to say about Christopher?
Well, she remembered that Christopher had visited once and that she was with a young woman that she described as a gypsy. That becomes important later.
Okay.
The family had a picture that they were able to share with me, but and they didn't know anything about this girl, this gypsy, except that she was with him. Mm-hmm. I was shocked to see a girl in the photo who looked a lot like our grandmother as a child. We're pretty sure the young woman he was traveling with was his daughter, Florence.
And really, when you communicated with them, no one in Christopher's family knew that he had been married to Stella. Actually, didn't even know the name Stella Smith, or that he had two daughters either. And no one knew what happened to him after that time. Officially. The family lore said that he was hanged for horse thievery, but they didn't even know if that was true.
Which is such a wild story, and it's also like there's no context. Like, where did that come from? How did you hear about this?
And when did that happen? Yeah,
and you know, what state? Like where? And nobody really knew.
Yeah.
So it just seemed kind of like a wild, random fact, and I made for a funny story, but I really didn't put much stock in it.
Yeah.
So, we heard about it. I wandered around it. It sounded too crazy to be true. But now we do know that that's not what actually happened. So we were able to get some of Christopher's military records, which was harder than you would think. So we had requested initially and received a few. A lot of his records from the Jefferson Barracks were involved in a huge fire. If you know anything about military records, there was a huge fire there and many were destroyed. And so there was not much to give. And so, it just was this brick wall. But I couldn't let it go because I kept thinking, he served in active duty, like World War I. How could you not have any information? How could, he never applied for Social Security. So he probably had veterans benefits. Like, why are we not finding anything? And so after years, and I do mean probably 15 years of just making numerous applications and hitting nowhere, I actually went to AI and I used it and kind of said, here's my brick wall. Help me figure out how to break through this. What am I missing? And so they had several suggestions, but one of them was to make a request for his veterans records instead of making the request for his military records, to make it to the VA and see if they had any VA records, which seemed, very logical. And so I did. And next thing we know, records come in the mail. Well, actually, they came by email. 150 pages worth.
Yeah. And kind of surprising stuff in those records, which we're going to get to. But it does explain where the family story about horse thievery came from.
It does. There's still I have some questions about like how they even knew about it, but somebody knew something because, or maybe he was just a storyteller himself.
Yeah.
But
okay, that's probably true, I'm guessing.
So there, like many things, there was a bit of truth to the story. So apparently, after Christopher served his first 2 terms, they were 2 one-year terms that he served honorably. He served first one in France, the second one stateside, and was honorably discharged. He re-enlisted. And it was kind of confusing because the initial record showed that he re-enlisted in the National Guard, but then I could find nothing after that. Well, in actuality, he didn't re-enlist in the National Guard. He started to, but then he changed his status, whatever, and he re-enlisted as a full enlistment. And he was assigned to Fort Riley, Kansas in the 2nd Cavalry.
And that was in 1921.
Yes.
And Fort Riley was the Army's main cavalry school, and the 2nd Cavalry was a horse-mounted unit. Can we guess where this is going right now, right?
So yes, he was part of a horse-mounted unit, the 2nd Cavalry, and they were still using horses, by the way, in the 1920s.
That's crazy.
So his military record also shows, that, not much detail, but yet a lot of detail, that On May 2nd of 1922, Christopher deserted the Army and was apprehended the same day.
So he didn't get far.
He didn't get far. He was court-martialed for desertion and for embezzlement.
Theft. He was in a horse-mounted unit of the Army. He deserted one day, was caught the same day, and tried for desertion and theft. So we don't know if he actually stole a horse. We don't know that. But like his family story goes, right, we can see where the story probably came from. Maybe not. Maybe there's a whole other story, but
unlikely.
This is all too coincidental.
So the family story now makes a little bit more sense, but he wasn't hanged. So all of this happened in 1922 before he even married Estrella, before the family member saw him in person. So that was just part of stories getting mixed up the way stories do.
Sure.
And, Christopher could have been the one doing the mixing up because it appears that he was a storyteller.
Well, he wouldn't have said he was hanged, obviously.
So Christopher, as a result of that charge, he was sentenced to 18 months of hard labor at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And then he was dishonorably discharged in 1923. Just before his discharge, as is military policy, about 3 months before, the military stripped him of all of his military service, all of his rights, took all of those things away, and also made him ineligible for any future benefits of any kind, and it was a dishonorable discharge.
So all of this happened before he even married Estrella. We can't say it was before he met her because we really don't. I mean, we don't know when he met her, but definitely before he married her. So I wonder if she knew about his criminal past.
I have no idea. But Christopher's military record also revealed he didn't always tell the truth.
You don't say.
We have record of him giving personal history that wasn't true. Like, for example, he said he had 2 brothers and both of them died in France in the war. Maybe he was referring to someone else that was like a brother to him, but he was giving family information to the military. He only had 1 brother. His name was John, and John did not die in France. No. He was in the military, but he long outlived all that.
Right.
Died at home in Texas, unrelated to any of those things.
Yeah.
So there was a history of him not being truthful.
Yeah. In those same records, you found that Christopher appealed to the Army for benefits, saying that his ear was injured in the war.
Multiple times.
Yeah. But
locations.
then the military found record of his ear being injured in a boxing match, not war. Actually nothing related to the Army at all. And so they found that he wasn't entitled to benefits. Made a whole case about it.
Right. I mean, a huge case. Actually, the records that were sent to us were part of an investigation that the VA did to prove whether or not this was the case or not. And I think part of it was if he had been able to substantiate that this injury happened in the war in France, it would have given him access to benefits that he had been stripped from.
Okay.
So we also found that he tried to gain access to veterans services within months of being away from Leavenworth. So he wasted no time. Almost immediately. He never stopped trying to apply for benefits. He did this using multiple times, using many different methods. Sometimes he changed the spelling of his name. So his name was sometimes Chris or Christopher. DeBoard was sometimes spelled B-O-A-R-D or B-O-R-D. Initially, I thought that was maybe literacy issues and just, mistakes.
Right.
But it appears that it was much more intentional as an attempt to be deceitful so that he could get access to services without being tied to this record, because now he was a felon and he was ineligible for all these services. In addition to that, he also used other people's, one other person's name 2 different times. James DeLozier. He applied for benefits. This is a real person who really was a veteran, but he applied for benefits using his identity. And so what was in these 150 pages that were sent to us, this investigation from the VA, was actually when they pulled all the pieces together and they linked they had 5 different applications. They had 5 different military ID numbers and 3 spellings of Christopher DeBoard, 2 of the James DeLozier, all identified to be the same, to be him and to be falsely making application for services. So they linked all of these together into this one record so that this could never happen again. And then they sent a letter to the real James DeLozier's, I don't know what you call it, headquarters, whoever managed his VA services, to let them know that
what was happening,
that he's being impersonated.
When we were talking about this, you made a really good point. When we think of benefits, like what kind of benefits was he accessing? Because of the time period, this would have all taken time to find out. So he would show up at a veteran's home or someplace that provides services like that and try to get services at that time. We're going to guess, right? This is guessing just from our general knowledge. We're talking probably about a place to stay we're probably talking about transportation, maybe even some kind of work, like, that's what we're talking. Maybe medical services, possibly.
And clearly telling stories.
That
weren't true, related to his own injuries, I'm using air quotes, and also to brothers that died that didn't actually die.
So he's showing up at a place trying to access those kinds of services. And while they are sending off letters and whatever they're doing, whatever their systems of checks and balance are, in the meantime, he would be getting services.
He would be.
Yeah. That some of the time frames, we just know that that's what was happening.
Well, it for sure happened in Danville.
We have
records of when he, 3 different times when he arrived and when he left.
And it's logical. Somebody who doesn't have a home base, who does seem to be a drifter, moves from place to place, family to family. We see that everywhere we have a history of Christopher, it looks like that kind of life. And so it would make sense that he's going to get like services for survival, really.
So this culminated and how they finally discovered who he was. He happened to be in the age range where while he served in World War I, he was actually young enough to still be eligible for the draft for World War II. So he's like 40 or 41 at the time of that draft. He did actually go and enlist, and he did actually get called up, and there's actually a newspaper article, listing the recruits who were being sent. He was sent to Peoria to be called up, and he went to Peoria. And then, of course, that's where the story kind of stops, because at some point they figured out who he was. He did not fully enlist at that point. Lots of questions. Clearly, they pulled all the records together at this point. Again, the documents that we had was the VA department's investigation, vetting all these things and verifying whether he did have a claim or didn't have a claim and who he was. But, you have to wonder, did they ever take legal action against him for his attempts to defraud? I don't know.
Well, I'm guessing after that investigation, he was cut off. Like somehow, I don't know how, but like they would have known, they would have been on to him at that point a little more.
And there were no
clearly.
additional, in the records we were given, there were no additional attempts
after that. So we know that Christopher wasn't always honest. He tried to work the system. Didn't seem like he was always successful with that, right? So other than a few attempts for, like in that case, to access services, and then the divorce in 1944, we don't really have any more leads on what happened to Christopher. Like, where did he end up? When, where, and how did he pass? There's more for us to find. So where does that leave us?
So the last time I can trace him was when he was called up for the draft in 1947.
No, that'd be too late.
No, it's not that late. It's in the mid 40s.
Okay.
Whenever the draft was, 42, 44, somewhere in there.
47 is when the investigation was.
Yeah. And then I find him on a city directory in Peoria. And I keep in mind, Peoria, the only time I ever know him to go to Peoria was when he got called up for the draft. But then I did find him on a city directory in 1947 as a laborer one time, and then nothing. And then, of course, the divorce was happening during that whole period as well. But then after that, absolutely nothing.
So nothing really after that for him. We don't have record of Estrella after 1937, really. Not even the court could contact her about the divorce or find her. Florence seemed to have some contact with Christopher off and on. Marie Christine was unaware of much of her own story. I mean, she, at this point, literally was living a completely separate life, unaware of her family. And this is where we're going to focus next. We're going to talk next about the generation left behind. What did it mean to be raised in the shadow of absence, and how did adoption shape the stories we were told? Thanks for listening. If you're walking your own search through DNA research, silence, or your family story, you're not alone.
If you want to learn more about our story, you can read it chapter by chapter on Substack at a blog called Buried Threads. We'd love it if you subscribed or left a review. It helps other listeners to find us. And if you've uncovered something through DNA that changed your understanding of your family, we would love to hear about it. Message us on Substack or find us on Instagram at Buried Threads.
Watch for our next episode to post right here. We'll also be dropping some documents and photos with each podcast. Let us know your questions and your comments as we go.
Until next week, keep pulling the thread.